Hey there, welcome to Talk to Me Tuesday on a Tuesday. I'm your host, Madi B, and today we have a very special show. Not only do we have a special show, but April is a very important month as it is the Observation of Sexual Abuse Awareness Month, a month where we try to educate and spread awareness to stop sexual abuse. Today, we will be discussing what this month means to our attorneys and our survivors. We will also discuss the path that was taken to find a resolution on the historic civil USC sexual abuse case. I have the pleasure today of introducing a prominent Houston attorney at D. Miller & Associates PLLC, and is also a member of the faculty of the Trial Lawyers College and an associate of the American Board of Trial Advocates. This attorney practices includes representing people who have sustained catastrophic injuries as a result of the carelessness of others, as well as advocating for survivors of sexual abuse in and out of the courtroom. He has appeared on ABC News, Nightline, and Good Morning America, and is frequently sought after his opinions in the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Head of Litigation of our USC Sexual Abuse Case, Andy Rubenstein. Welcome.
Thanks, Marty. Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. And we're so excited to have you on today's show to really talk about the sexual abuse month, as well as a case that you have a lot of knowledge and you actually just found a resolution just as short as 2 weeks ago. So I know I mentioned to Andy that you advocate for survivors of sexual abuse. So I want you to tell those that are watching right now, what does this month mean to you and your clients?
Well, it's good to have attention, brought to this. There's an epidemic of this kind of institutional abuse in our country. And I think the greatest disinfectant that we have is sunshine, and putting light on it is important to eradicating it.
Yeah, totally agree. Now, you have many clients and you have been a voice for many survivors. Tell us a little bit about the USC sexual abuse case, just in case there's someone that hasn't heard of some of those facts. But what happened that compelled you to hold the university accountable?
Well, this story about USC and their only full-time gynecologist, male gynecologist, George Tyndall, it broke about 3 years ago in the Los Angeles Times. Some Pulitzer Prize winning reporters, Harriet Ryan, Matt Hamilton, and Paul Pringle, they broke this story. And when it came out in the Los Angeles Times, that coincided with the phone at our office starting to ring. And we began getting calls, began talking to potential clients, and they would tell me their stories. And there were a lot of common threads, things that were not necessarily in the news article that Harriet Ryan and her colleagues wrote, things that were not common knowledge to anybody who hadn't experienced the abuse at USC. But apparently, if you were a woman at USC while Tyndall was there and were examined by him, these things were all too common. And we began hearing about this repetition of egregious behavior. And pretty soon we decided as a firm that this is the kind of case we could stand behind. And this is something that we wanted to take on as a law firm.
Yeah. And so I want you to just kind of shed some light on, how many years of the abuse that you mentioned from gynecologist George Tyndall took place at the University of Southern California.
Well, it took place the whole time he was there. He began working at USC in 1989. We have a client that attended in 1989, and he was discharged 2016, and it continued right up through the time of his discharge. And we have clients that attended for all of those years.
Wow. Wow. That's a lot of years of this type of abuse that was happening under the university level. Now, we're going to talk about that here in a little bit, but I want you to walk us back on that day that you heard about the news and heard about what happened. And what were your thoughts that led you to make the decision to represent these women, these survivors, and have a voice for them?
Well, we had been talking about the story in the LA Times, and it naturally brought back memories of the Larry Nassar case at Michigan State. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that long before the May of 2018 story broke in the LA Times that Nassar and his abuses, well-documented abuses with the Olympic gymnasts, female gymnasts, and at Michigan State were in the news. And so we thought, you know what, USC is a bigger university in a lot of ways than Michigan State. It's got a bigger endowment. It's a global university. There's people from all over the world who seek out USC for their undergraduate and graduate degrees. We have clients from all over the world, from the Baltic area, from the Middle East, from Asia. And so we knew that this likely would be more involved and a bigger story than what happened at Michigan State. We know that people who are guilty of this kind of behavior, as described by our clients, they don't just suddenly break bad. They've got a history of doing this. And when we learned that he had been there since 1989, we knew that this case was going to cover generations of women and that it was likely going to be a really big deal. And it was, as it turns out. Unfortunately, it really was.
Right. And I know we're going to touch on some of those things that you kind of highlighted. I want to go deeper into those things. But before we do so, trust is so important to us, especially when it comes to medical physicians and doctors and all that good stuff. So talk to me about trust and betrayal and how it applied to this case in particular.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, Madi, I think this was a case about abuse of trust and abuse of power. There's few instant authority figures, absolute authority figures in our society. But the ones that we know of are, police with their badges, clergy with their collars, and doctors with their lab coats. And they are instant authority figures, but in our culture, many of us are brought up to listen to them, to respect them, to do what they say. In the context of USC and Tyndall, he was the gynecologist, the only full-time gynecologist at the Student Health Center. The Student Health Center is part of the tuition that each of these women paid to attend USC. When they went off to school, many of these women weren't actually women yet. They were girls. They were children. They were in their teens. And they had never been to a gynecologist before. Some of them had never been to an American doctor in any capacity. And their parents, by and large, entrusted them to USC to take care of their children while they were away at school. They were entrusted to USC faculty, they were entrusted to USC's administration, and they were entrusted to USC's physicians. When they put their trust in USC and that trust was betrayed by a predatory doctor, that's the ultimate betrayal. That's the ultimate breach of trust. And everything started from that betrayal. And then the next betrayal is when USC learned about these abuses. when supervisory administrative personnel knew about these abuses, had reason to believe that something wasn't right, that these children were being harmed, and they failed to act. They failed to take the cancerous growth and amputate it. That was the second betrayal. And we know that there are reports of Tyndall's behavior in the early 90s. And there were probably thousands of women who could have avoided these painful events had USC had the courage to step up and speak out the way that our clients did in filing these lawsuits.
Yeah, those betrayals are huge. I know you're talking about from the interested individual wearing a lab coat as well as the university. So I want to talk about a little bit of that ultimate betrayal based on the survivors you represent. What were some of the things that you've either heard as far as details or done to these women by the gynecologist that highlighted that ultimate betrayal that you just mentioned?
Well, I don't want to get too granular on this, but he did engage in a lot of unnecessary exams. There were intimate gynecological exams, pelvic exams with no clinical basis, photographing clients with no clinical basis for doing so. He would ask some to, for example, wear an open gown in front, untied, and perform calisthenics for some unknown medical reason. He would invent medical diseases which would require them to return to his clinic where he could examine them yet again. And it was only upon leaving USC and going to their own private doctor afterwards that they realized that they never had these conditions to begin with. These are just some examples of the kinds of betrayals that Tyndall and our clients that he engaged in with them.
Yeah, a lot of suffering from your clients that went through, the sexual abuse. Now, you said this happened for 30 years, and the sexual abuse and the damages were all different. Kind of, you've already highlighted a little bit about that. But how is it that some of their stories are also very similar?
Well, he had a playbook. He fetishized the practice of medicine to a large degree, and he did the same things over and over. It was working for him, and he developed a methodology. He would groom them, and so these are the things that he knew he could get away with to a large extent, because he felt, I'm sure, that there was an explanation of some kind, a clinical medical explanation of why he was doing some of these things. And that he would pass it off as, well, our clients, these children, these young girls, they didn't know the difference between an awkward gynecological exam and sexual abuse, which is ridiculous. They did know, maybe not in the moment because of the trust and the culturization of trusting a doctor, but it did declare itself later. There were problems because of this. They were sexually abused by Tyndall, and the effects of that did come out sideways sometimes, months or even years, decades later.
Wow. Now, you just mentioned two big things. Well, you mentioned a lot of great points, but after decades of abuse, and you mentioned kind of sort of a playbook, have you, right? Is it true that no one knew at USC or Dr. George Tyndall's support staff?
I don't think that's true, no. I think people did know. I think that's why they paid $1 billion.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Because I know a lot of, stuff that was on the media too is almost like they didn't know, the university didn't know that they had complaints. Now, a bigger question, I know you mentioned some of the survivors had a trust and, situation with this being a doctor, not knowing maybe the difference between the abuse or if this is a normal exam. But out of those survivors, did some of them complain about this behavior?
Some of our the clients, the women that I represented,
the ones that you represent, or even any of the other survivors out there as well.
Oh yeah, there were complaints. They were never, nobody followed through on these. Nobody acted on these. But there were complaints for years. Absolutely.
Yeah, which kind of shows, again, with those complaints, that they had some type of knowledge and recollection that something was happening, right? Now, I want you to tell us, Attorney Andy Rubenstein, about the California law in regards to the obstacles that you faced within the litigation on behalf of your clients to file a complaint, and what did you do to ensure your clients had a voice no matter when the incident occurred?
Well, in cases like this that go on for decades, there's always going to be an issue about statute of limitations. There's a legal window within which somebody must file a claim, or else it legally becomes stale. It's barred by law. And different claims under different theories, different laws, they have different statutes of limitations. But in this case, we had a number of clients who attended USC in, the 2013 through 2016, while Tyndall was still there. Their claims likely would have been okay because of the recency of those. But for the women who attended, from the late 80s until 2014, in all likelihood, there was going to be a significant barrage of motions to dismiss and demurrers trying to remove these cases, take away these women's day in court, deny them justice because the claims had been hidden for so long by USC that nobody had come forward to file these cases. There was a confluence of beneficial prerogatives that happened at this time in 2018. The Me Too movement had started to become very vocal. There were marches beginning in January of 2018. I attended one with my daughter, my youngest daughter, here in Houston, in fact, but they were all over the country. Sunlight was lighting up these issues, and the conduct of Tyndall was resonating with people in a different way than it had before. It was resonating with folks who may not have really embraced this kind of legislation to empower people whose claims had become stale for no reasons of their own. And so we were part of a group of lawyers who worked with the assembly, the state assembly in California, for a legislative fix to this statute of limitations that would have denied most of these women their day in court. We had some legal arguments to make that would have opened the doors still, but it was going to be a very tough and strenuous road. So we worked with different legislators, assembly persons in California, and ultimately California's Governor Gavin Newsom, he signed AB 1510, which opened a window of a year, the year of 2020, to get these claims on file. And we had a full year to file any claims for any person who was harmed between 1989 and 2016. And it saved a lot of people's cases. I can assure you of that.
Wow. Well, changing the law is huge, and you should be proud of yourself for such a big monument action there. So, tell me, how does this changing of the law, or how this can help other universities in other states as well?
Well, let me just say something. It wasn't so much me. We had a number of our clients travel to Sacramento. They testified. They met with the people there. They told their own stories. They had the courage to speak up and step into this, political arena and talk about some very uncomfortable things. And so it's the lawyers helped set it up, but it was our clients and the other survivors of this that really made this happen. I think the settlement, the USC settlement, is, it's $1 billion. It made the news. There's been a lot of reporting on it. Other universities and institutions, for that matter, are taking notice. There's a lot of university presidents and provosts who are aware of this, and I think they're probably going back and trying to get their own houses in order, because I don't think any one institution, any one school, private or state, parochial or public, I don't think they're immune from it. I think we've seen it in the church abuse cases. There's no one denomination that's immune. This is happening in institutions. It's happening where there is pressure not to speak up, where there's pressure to, continue promoting the public image of the institution, and that will take precedent. And I think cases like this have made those people stop and get together with their boards and say, look, we need to do our own in-house cleaning, or this could happen to us. And given the size of this settlement, I think that these institutions are probably going to be acting on this sooner than later.
That's awesome. I love hearing that, it could show some accountability also in other universities. And thank you for clarifying that, who was part of changing the law. And I want to definitely highlight the survivors that had a huge part in this. So I want to thank you for clarifying that, so that way we give the right message out there. So I want to highlight 3 years ago, the media was very prominent, and even seeing you in a couple of the outlets. But do you believe this, or even changing the law, has helped with the criminal investigation?
I don't think it affected the criminal investigation. I think that was on a parallel course. I think we've cooperated with the LAPD and the district attorney's office. Some of our clients have been contacted. I know other lawyers whose clients have been contacted. I think that the investigation that was done by Harriet Ryan, and her colleagues has helped with the criminal investigation as well. Maybe something that we've been able to facilitate is people feeling more comfortable or less uncomfortable to speak out and talk to the police. It's not most people's default position to want to run and go talk to the police, especially in some communities where the police and the civilians may be at odds. So hopefully this finds some common ground, and there'll be some justice that way too.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I want to talk a little bit about USC and when they let Dr. George Tyndall walk away with a severance. Do you think this was a way for the university to kind of sweep it under the rug on what was allegedly happening on the campus grounds?
Yeah, I think they wanted to keep it quiet then. I think that was, 2 years before the story broke. They knew what was coming down the pike. They knew if this got out, there would be outrage. And that's what there was. The next head to roll was the longtime president, Max Nikias. That guy had fundraised over $7 billion for the university. You know why they would want to keep him around. He was ultimately let go. And there were a number of people around him that were forced to resign. They were pushed out. Some, left on their own accord because I'm sure they could see the tea leaves in that. But clearly they were trying to save the reputation of the school, and that's why they wanted Tyndall to leave quietly.
Right. It's a good way that you kind of put that. But, with everything that's been going on in the last 3 years, I know that's something that wasn't a quiet exit per se, right? We wanted to make sure that our clients, survivors, had a voice. Now, I want to turn to how many survivors, Attorney Andy Rubenstein, did you represent in this case? And just tell us a little bit about how many cases that you have in retrospect with some of the other maybe attorneys.
Well, we had about 150 clients, and during the pendency of this litigation, some lawyers filed and quickly settled a federal class action. About 50 of our clients chose to be part of the class action. They had solid reasons and good reasons, and I don't begrudge them at all for making that choice. It was their choice, and it was good for them. So that case resolved a year ago. Our case is in state court, and we continued on with 100 women, and that's how many we have now.
Okay, and just for the record, for those that are watching, the class action is separate than the state filing that you had. They're totally separate. I know sometimes it kind of looks like it's all one case, but they are completely separate, correct?
Yeah, they're separate. The class action represented about 10,000 women, and that case settled for $215 million. Our case had 702 women, and it settled for $842 million. So significant difference. In our case, we were able to do discovery. We learned a lot about what was going on at USC. The old saying from Watergate, what they knew and when they knew it, that kind of thing. Whereas I think the class action was a rush. They didn't do any discovery. I think they significantly under-evaluated the harm. It's a shame for those women that were part of it. I really don't think they got a fair shake, but I do respect their choices.
Yeah. And I just want to highlight really quickly, you just mentioned some of these numbers of the women. And sadly, do I say this, it's one too many. This sexual abuse that was in this university, it's way too many women in regards to how many you represented and other attorneys in the class action as well. But I do want you, Attorney Andy Rubenstein, I know you kind of mentioned a little bit about the filing and the litigation. So I want you to tell us a little bit about that filing and litigation process before and after, for those that are watching and just have a little bit of curiosity of that process.
Well, I mean, we filed a lawsuit. Some of our clients chose to use their names. Some of them chose to file as Jane Does. Good reasons for both. The harm of that they experienced, filing as a Jane Doe or filing with your name, it had no difference, no bearing on the amount of recovery or the kinds of harms they sustained. There was no reason for that. Just some didn't want to have their names out there. And look, with USC, a lot of these, it's, to the, you have to applaud USC. I mean, they do turn out some very bright, successful people. We represent school principals and doctors and architects and performers and producers and directors and dentists and accountants. And there's, the list can go on. All of these people have worked to become successful in their chosen careers. USC has an incredible network of alumni resources, and a lot of USC alums hire other USC alums. So one reason for not putting their names out might be they just didn't want the connection made. They didn't want that to be the first conversation they have at a new job interview or at a cocktail party or at Thanksgiving dinner. So, but we have women that filed both in their name and as Jane Does, and those were filed in Los Angeles State District Court. Los Angeles County has a complex case division with several judges in it who handle big cases like this with multiple plaintiffs. And all of these cases, both with ours and the 600 other cases, those were all consolidated into Judge Carolyn Kuhl's court. And she would control the process. There was, it wasn't a class action, but there was the discovery and the pleadings and all of the deadlines. It was monolithic in the way that she ran it so that everybody would be moving along at the same pace. But each of these cases would be tried separately, and there was no homogeneous one size fits all like the class action had. So that was done. And after they were consolidated, the court would have us meet periodically to update her on what was going on. There were lots of depositions of USC personnel, everyone from the person who was in charge of IT and who cleaned out George Tyndall's computer when he was let go, to nurses who observed his behavior, to high-ranking administrative officials. I'd love to talk to you about what they said in their depositions, but we're still under a confidentiality order, so I must respect that too.
Yes, understood. Thank you so much for disclosing as much as you're able to. Now, I want you to walk through your thoughts when the settlement was announced, that verdict in open court on March 25th.
It was a just a tremendous accomplishment, I think, to get here. We never faltered in our belief that we were on the right side of history in this case, that we unfortunately had a lot of clients with really bad cases. And I say unfortunately because it's a shame that this ever happened. There's plenty of work for lawyers like me to do out there. And, I enjoyed being able to fight the good fight on this one, but I'm sorry that our clients had to go through this. And I was conflicted, as I heard these claims being announced, and I'd known about it sometime before, working on the resolutions committee for this case. But hearing it in open court, I was a little conflicted. I was pleased that it was such a large settlement for these clients, but at the same time, the money is it represents value of things that were taken and stolen from them. And for there to be that much value being paid by USC meant there was a lot of value that was taken from these 700 women. So it was a little sad too.
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. This is something that, we definitely don't want anyone to go through this. And it's very sad that we do have clients that had to experience, such a tough time, and especially in their college years. Now, I want to talk about, there's already a settlement, a verdict that happened in open court, but based on your experience as an attorney, what happens after this? Is there anything else that we're going to see from USC, or does it kind of stop right here and it's kind of, tucked under the rug again? What is the process after that settlement gets done?
Well, I mean, part of the reason we filed these cases was for USC to make some institutional changes. Our clients have a connection, a deep connection with USC. And, it's like a family. And just like family, not every experience is pleasant, but at the end of the day, they're still family, and you hope you can grow and find, some new ground and heal. And that's kind of what this was. One of our clients referred to it as a intervention. And so in that regard, USC has pledged to adopt and implement some new procedures. We will be following that. Our clients will be following that. That remains to be seen whether they actually will follow through on this. I'm hopeful they will. And, other than USC making its payments to these women, there's really nothing more for them to do except, move on and try and be better.
Right. Holding that accountability that some of these clients do want to see a change within the institution. Now, a big question that's out there in the media, and maybe you could shed some light for us, Attorney Andy Rubenstein. Do you have any information in regards to the criminal case or the time frame and when we'll see the news on the trial? I know as far as, having George Tyndall potentially go to jail, do you have anything that you could shed some light in regards to this?
Tyndall's awaiting trial on dozens of sex crimes in LA County Superior Court. But because of this, pandemic, all kinds of court proceedings, including his, have been delayed and they're just dragging along. When he does appear, he's already pled not guilty. And I'm confident, I have every reason to believe his defense is going to be that his care was medically appropriate and that he has done nothing wrong. I anticipate that many of the women in this settlement will be testifying and they will be giving different accounts from the witness stand.
And now this case that you represented, which is a civil case, can any of this help out with the criminal charges, or can any of this evidence go into that criminal charges? What is your take and expertise on that?
I'm sure there's going to be some common ground there. But, USC is not on trial. Tyndall is. And so to the extent, USC knew or let him get away with it, I don't know if that's relevant in the criminal trial. But certainly what he did to these women is going to be relevant. And, we never got to depose Tyndall. He took the Fifth Amendment on everything. So largely it will be based on accounts from our very credible and reliable clients. And I'm sure that the district attorney will be working with them to develop that testimony.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that information. I know we're kind of getting close to wrapping up the show. Now, this verdict, this case is a historic landmark, the highest settlement of a collegiate sexual abuse case. Now, I want to start off by saying how proud I am of you to represent your clients, the survivors. But I do want to ask you, how does this make you feel to find the resolution for your clients? How does your clients feel about the work that you have done and been a voice for them?
Honestly, I think they're glad it's over. We still have some work to do to bring the boat in, to dock it. There's some details left, but I think they're all relieved. I think they would like to move on and just get on with their lives at this point.
Yeah, Rightfully so. Now, your clients, the survivors, are very sharp women. You just named a bunch that they're of their profession. So, what has been one thing that you have learned from these brave women and their stories?
You know, I think what I've seen with these women, and I've seen it with other people who have come out the other end of a tragedy or a emotionally tempering experience, is that, look, this happened to them. It's part of them, but it does not define them, right? They're more than this. It's something they carry with them. My team that I worked with Sean and Rochelle and Canyon, I mean, we know some details about this and about their lives and about their struggles that their closest friends and spouses and family members don't know. They trusted us with that. And I think that some of them are choosing to do some personal work and figure out, how this has affected the arc of their life through now. Some of them are going to just, put it on a shelf and say, I've done enough introspection. I'm good with where this is now, and I'm ready to just move on. Thank you. And I think both are good ideas.
Yes, agreed. Everyone will have a different process on dealing with this. Now, Attorney Andy Rubenstein, I want to thank you for being on the show. I want to thank you for allowing us to ask you questions in this case that has created a historic path. And I just want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being transparent and allowing us to just tap a little bit into your world and what the last 3 years looked like for you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Madi. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to have you. Now, for all of you guys that are watching, I want you guys to reflect and honor this month. This month is Sexual Abuse Awareness Month. By wearing teal, a teal ribbon, a teal color on your shirt, you are honoring those that have been affected by sexual abuse of some kind, whether it's women or men. I want to thank you guys for tuning into the show, and most importantly, for sharing the show. The more you get to share, the more knowledge we get to spread. And so I want to thank you guys for tuning in to Talk to Me Tuesday on a Tuesday. I'm your host, Madi B.